I'm delighted this morning to be able to introduce Commissioner Cheryl LaFleur from FERC. We are grateful that you've traveled all this way. And I'm also, on a personal level, I'm sad for your Red Sox, but I'm certain that your Patriots will do well, Commissioner. Anyway, and I'm not going to say anything about footballs. Anyway, Commissioner LaFleur was nominated in 2010 by President Obama to be a commissioner on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. From 2013 until earlier this year, she served as acting chair and then later chair of FERC. Prior to joining the commission, Commissioner LaFleur built 20 years experience, or has 20 years experience in leadership in the energy sector. She's been in many, many facets of the business and knows her business well. She's graduated from Princeton University and has a law degree from Harvard Law School. So I'll leave it at that. Commissioner, it's a delight to have you here today. Commissioner LaFleur.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. I'm thrilled to be here. I also won't talk about football, although I have to say I did think last night when I was talking to Mark Farron, yes, the Super Bowl is here this year, but I'm not going to have those thoughts. I have wanted to come to this summit really for a few years, and I think I definitely picked the right year to come because you have an amazing amount of stuff going on. I enjoyed all of yesterday, but I particularly enjoyed the rodeo of regulators. And while they were speaking, it got me thinking about the movie, the 1963 movie, How the West Was Won. So I went home and Googled it last night and found that it really had an all-star cast that is very well suited to play the panelists from across the West that we saw yesterday. The rugged John Wayne as Steve Berberich, the earnest Jimmy Stewart as Commissioner Philip Jones, the handsome Gregory Peck as John Savage, girl next door Debbie Reynolds as Susan Bitter-Smith, and a very young Henry Fonda as our own Travis Kavula. But when I remake it, I'm going to rename it How the West Was Won, O-N-E, notice I didn't put any FERC commissioners in the cast. It's not a horror movie. It's a Western. So, yeah. It is hard to follow yesterday. I thought what I would try to do this morning is talk briefly about some of the trends we're seeing across the nation, then discuss how they're really reflected and amplified here in the West. And I will share some thoughts about some of the drivers of success going forward for you. Before I start, I want to recognize a few other folks from FERC who made the trip, or in some cases are here. In the front row is Becky Robinson, who's my advisor, who handles California ISO, West, and hydro issues, among other things. Carlos Clay is here somewhere. He's in the western part of the energy market regulation at FERC, works on a lot of your cases. And of course, right here in Folsom, just down the road, Saeed Faroukpay and Bob Helrick Dawson are stationed here. It's really, really hard duty to be stationed out here in Northern California for FERC. My standard disclaimer, I speak, it's like the NFL, this is only for the use of the NFL, no, any authorized use is unauthorized. I speak only for myself, not for FERC, and I will try at least not to discuss any pending cases. What we're really seeing across the country is that much of our work right now in all dimensions is being driven by the transformation in the nation's resource mix, driven by factors well known to this audience, the abundance of domestic natural gas, the growth of renewables and demand-side resources, and new environmental regulations, especially the EPA's Clean Power Plan. I noticed it was published in the Federal Register just this morning, so we're off to the next phase of that. These changes in power supply are, first of all, driving a lot of our work on infrastructure, both gas pipelines that we certificate and transmission, where we don't do the siting but work on planning and cost allocation. And they're also changing the way we use existing infrastructure at both the transmission and distribution level. The resource changes are also driving considerable changes in the markets across the country. Increased reliance on just-in-time natural gas is leading to issues and a focus on gas-electric coordination, particularly in the Northeast and in the desert Southwest. The surge of low-price natural gas, as well as all the new environmental rules, are leading to the retirement of a lot of our baseload capacity, particularly coal, and driving the need for new investment. Changes in the competitive markets are underway to really look closely under the hood and make sure that reliability is properly valued and sustained right now. It's particularly important at a time like this that the markets that are supposed to be sending the investment signal, our lunch speaker yesterday said it's the best way to do it except for all the other ways, or the worst way to do it except for all the other ways, that those markets send a correct price signal. And we've recently begun an effort to look at price formation in the organized energy markets to make sure that these things that are necessary to keep the lights on are reflected in price. Last month, we voted out a notice of proposed rulemaking requiring ISOs to align the dispatch and settlement intervals with scarcity pricing to change the price more frequently. And as we heard several times yesterday, that accurate interval pricing is important to utilizing intermittent renewables. Two of the RTOs, including CAISO right here, are working on ramping products, using the market to try to price products to ramp generation up and down to accommodate intermittent renewable generation. And I hope you copyrighted the term duck curve, because now I hear it everywhere I go. I was actually trying to look it up recently for a couple months ago for someone and looked on your website, and I was having trouble finding it. Then I just Googled duck curve and I got like 1,000 hits. So that's it. Across the country, changes in power supply and changes in infrastructure are also contributing to much greater regionalization, cooperation over a broader geography in many areas of the country. This is driven by a few things. First, the benefits of diversity and operating over a broader footprint, particularly with greater penetration of renewables, is contributing to the expansion of competitive markets and regional planning structures across the country. When I first went to FERC, I had an old foam core chart that had all the different organized markets in different colors. And at that time, it had quite a lot of white space, certainly all around California, but also in the Southeast and between markets and other parts of the country. That has changed. That chart is long gone. It's one of my moves, but it would be grossly wrong now. A couple years ago, the Mid-Continent ISO almost doubled the size of their footprint by including large parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas, and Missouri, including states that had never been in a market, Louisiana and Mississippi. And just this month, the Southwest Power Pool doubled in size by taking in an integrated system across parts of 7 states in the upper Midwest. And both of those required a lot of negotiations, as you can well imagine, to bring in states that had not been in an organized market before, bring in companies in states that had not been in an organized market, and to work out the difficult issues of costs and responsibility for things to be fair to both the existing market members and new. And so that represents several years of work. Another reason we're seeing more regionalism is all the investment in infrastructure, which doesn't end at the state line in many cases and is best planned regionally. FERC's 2011 Order 1000 required regional transmission planning and cost allocation, not just in FERC jurisdictional markets, but in FERC jurisdictional utilities across the country. And I think we're now moving from the stage of litigation and talking about it to actually seeing it be applied across the country. The planning regions for Order 1000 include not just the 6 competitive markets, but planning organizations in the bilateral market regions, 3 out here in the West and 3 in the Southeast. We've seen also, and I'll talk about this in a minute, robust voluntary participation by public power in those non-RTO planning processes, which is, of course, essential to make them really work for the regions. Final factor driving regionalization is all the new environmental compliance requirements, especially the Clean Power Plan. While we're still in the early compliance phase and states are figuring out what they're going to do, every study that I have seen from anywhere around the country has shown that regional compliance in the long run is cheaper than state-by-state compliance. I did see this morning that already a lawsuit of 24 states was filed the minute it was in the Federal Register, including 5 Western states. So that's another form of regional cooperation, not exactly the kind. The EPA is a uniter, not a divider. So turning to the West, really all of these trends, changes in power supply, changes in infrastructure, changes in markets, greater regionalization, are writ large out here. Everything's larger out here. But the way they're playing out is very much influenced by the distinctive characteristics of the Western United States. Now, I'm not from here. You certainly don't need to tell me what the West is like. You don't need me to tell you what the West is like, but I thought it might be interesting from an outsider's point of view looking over what I see as some of the real distinguishing characteristics that make this a different region than all the other regions that we look at. The first, of course, is geography. It's much larger. Population centers are more spread out. The transmission lines are longer and often stability balanced, really a different piece of the nation's infrastructure. They say that if the nation was developed from west to east, California would be like 20 states and New England would be 1 national park. But that's not the way it happened, so you have big states out here. Second difference is really the political economy. There's a huge diversity of political orientation in the West, particularly between California, where we stand today, and many of the states that tend to be red whenever you see them on CNN. Thirdly, there's a unique prominence of public power, which pops up everywhere around the country, but nowhere to the extent as in the West. The West is the home to the country's largest hydro projects, as you well know, and public power entities including Bonneville, WAPA, Salt River Project, and others. It's the home of the nation's largest municipals, LADWP, SMUD, and others, and a wealth of smaller munis, co-ops, and joint power agencies. And finally, resources. In addition to hydro, plants bigger than any this Eastern girl had ever seen when I started visiting them, the West has a wealth of renewable resources, solar, wind, geothermal. From 2010 to 2014, the Western interconnection generated 82% of the nation's solar power and 28% of its wind power. 9 Western states have renewable portfolio standards or targets. Of course, California with the most ambitious in the continental United States. And last but not least, all of these changes in resources, markets, and environmental rules are driving greater regionalization in the West, which seems to have been the theme of this conference. The energy imbalance market, covering parts of 5 states beyond California, will turn 1 year old later this month. And it literally seems that every week when I get to work, I get a press release of new people looking at joining the energy imbalance market. In recent weeks, Puget, Portland General, Arizona Public Service, of course, NV Energy, earlier, Idaho Power, and the announcements seem to keep coming. We heard a lot yesterday that Pacific Corp is exploring joining the California ISO as a participating transmission owner, a different significant step. Of course, the Pacific Northwest has been proceeding in parallel with regional efforts, working to establish and think about a centrally cleared economic dispatch, another effort we've been following closely. Now, I've been looking at the energy imbalance market from afar for several years, and I think I've said in many speeches in various places in the West that I truly believed they would not develop if they were seen in any way. Regional markets were seen as driven by FERC or driven by anyone in Washington, D.C. It'll only work if it's driven locally or organically. I had a friend in college who lived upstairs from me who always used to talk about vibes, sending positive vibes, sending negative vibes. And what I've been saying for about 4 years is that the only thing I'm doing with the energy imbalance market is sending positive vibes so they would go out west without really saying anything. But since you invited me, I thought I would step a little bit further and actually presume to give you some advice. I have seen a lot of regional efforts around the country. I was involved in setting up a regional market in New England in the late 1990s, And in the past 5 years, I have visited really several times all of the ISO RTOs, their boards, states around the country. And I've tried to think about what are the key drivers of success that characterize regional organizations that really work for customers. And by that I mean that can keep going when there are differences of opinion and obstacles, because it's set up in a way that can overcome that and keep driving forward for customers. And I thought of a few to mention. The first thing, and probably the most important thing, is getting the balance right, the explicit and effective balance between maximizing state interests and thinking regionally. We have a federal system. The governors, the 50 state governments have a lot of power over different things and choices in their states. I've already said the West is particularly diverse, but honestly, this is just as much an issue, even in places that you might look at the map and think would just get along brilliantly. Having been involved in New England, which seems like somewhat politically aligned states, they're certainly tiny compared to out here. I know it's still difficult to get the alchemy right because states have different policy objectives. They look at each other in different ways. And it's essential that the right structures, the governance structures, and the organizational structures be in place to allow people to think regionally, but not forget their own states, municipalities, and companies. I think on this one you've already made a great deal of progress, and I tried to think of other things beyond the energy imbalance market that really demonstrated that. First of all, the West is the only region of the country that voluntarily structured an interconnection-wide transmission coordination process, with the California ISO, West Connect, Columbia Grid, and Northern Tier Transmission Group coming together on a single Order 1000 interregional process to at least set up a structure to identify opportunities for transmission across the region. Everywhere else we just saw one region with its neighbor and a region with another neighbor, but this is a West-wide effort that I think bodes well. Secondly, on the reliability front, I've been closely following the ongoing work of WEC, the Western Electricity Coordinating Council, Peak Reliability, and YRAB, as they have worked over the last 4 years to apply the lessons of the Southern California September 2011 blackout. And a lot of work has gone on to improve reliability coordination and situational awareness across the West from state to state. A different kind of coordination, but a big building block, I think. And of course, regional market governments is being worked on right now to support an effective balance of state and regional issues. I was really encouraged by the panel yesterday because of the honesty of all the states about the places where they differed, but their commitment to really try to compromise and work together on a structure that would take it forward. I also noted with great interest, as we all did, the recent California legislation, SB 350, empowering the California ISO looking at studying the impacts of a regional market on California ISO governance and ways to change the California ISO, in looking at things like the overall benefit to ratepayers. Is the first step in really supporting the potential growth of the California ISO. I know that's a lot more to go on, but I thought that was a major step based on everything I had seen from California before. Beyond respect for different states, the second place where I've seen regional organizations founder, and that I think is a real success driver, is building in a respect for different business models. And that's especially important out here, the ability to integrate public and private power. When that doesn't happen well, it threatens the ISOs greatly. When it happens, it really allows the planning to work. This issue came up out here in the West in the Order 1000 process, and we got proposals from West Connect and Columbia Grid for different ways to allow public entities to participate in regional planning without being subject to binding cost allocations simply by virtue of their participation, because they're not FERC jurisdictional. Took a little working through it, but we approved those cost allocation methods in the cases of West Connect and Columbia Grid that are really intended to allow public entities to participate without stepping all the way in to anything that would be FERC jurisdictional, and I think that's very important. Now, the other thing is who actually becomes an ISO member. Most ISOs and RTOs around the country, including here, have some municipal members, but something very significant happened earlier this month when the Southwest Power Pool, for the first time, added a Federal Power Marketing Administration, WPA, as a participating transmission member. That was something that was called for in the Energy Policy Act of 2005, but it never happened because obviously it's extremely complicated to work through how that is going to work. And they worked through some very difficult issues of transmission cost allocation to allow a federal entity to join a market. We recently reviewed that and approved the resolution of those issues, denying rehearing as recently as last week. And we're going to be very closely looking at how that works for WPA as a model, since it's the first one. The third real driver of success or not success for regional efforts is more in the details, in the quality and care of market design. Details really matter, and if you don't get them right, the regional organization will be a shadow rather than what it's supposed to be. As I mentioned earlier, FERC and RTOs are working to adapt markets to changes in the resource mix, but that's really only one example of constant tariff filings and refinements that we get from the RTOs all the time. I believe that as the markets mature, they're improving, and new markets can and have to learn from earlier efforts and what went wrong in other parts of the country. The participants in the energy imbalance market have the benefit of having the EIM run by the California ISO, a very large and experienced market operator that underwent a complete market redesign in 2008 and has been highly successful in integrating renewables on a large scale. As I said, we're approaching the first anniversary of EIM going live, and I think it's fair to say we already learned a lot from early transitions and adjustments that can be applied and built on as the market grows. The fourth success factor, which is a little slower to develop, but is something that I think you're well situated here, is actual infrastructure. Software is great. I mean, I don't understand it, but I understand it's very powerful. Millennials know how to work computers, and no, seriously, software can knit together a region. But in my opinion, it's easier for people coming together from different states in a region to think and operate regionally if they're actually woven together by steel in the ground, wires and pipes, because that actually unites their day-to-day work for customers. In addition, adequate transmission is necessary to optimally utilize the West's wealth of resources of all types and allow them to be balanced over a wide area. Now, the West already has strong interstate transmission ties between states and markets, but in the past several years, we've seen a lot more transmission developed or under construction in California, Nevada, with their huge line between North and South, Arizona, the Pacific Northwest, and elsewhere. I already mentioned the ongoing regional planning under Order 1000. I know we didn't invent regional planning, but I hope that will help to further the transmission investment that serves the mutual objectives of a large region. As the energy and imbalance market grows, we're already seeing that participating entities may look to join and participate with really varying levels of transmission interconnection. And they can do so because of other ways to integrate. But in the long run, the more transmission is available to move imbalanced energy among the balancing authority areas, the more competition there can be in the energy imbalance market, which is why it was set up. The reason I'm sort of hammering on these prerequisites of success is I think the potential benefits of regionalization are very large. I always say that all energy issues that I've ever seen for the last 30 years really come down to the same three things: balancing the triangle of reliability, cost to customers, and environmental impact. And I think that carefully designed, the energy imbalance market and other regional efforts have the potential to help along all three dimensions. They can help increase reliability, which is the job one, through the sharing of diverse resources over a wider footprint, through better management of imbalances, faster dispatch of replacement resources, whether generation, I know it was number 6 on the chart at lunch yesterday, but it's still number 1 in how the grid works. Generation, storage, demand response during and after contingency events. Regional markets like EIM can help decrease costs to customers. That's usually the driver, other than reliability, of why they're put together in the first place, to help states do things more economically. Optimizing resources every 5 minutes means that the market will be looking for the most efficient, the cheapest resources over a broader footprint in real time. The broad footprint also means that entities can reduce their need for reserves and have more diversity. Since there's more diversity in load, of course, you're so big, you have multiple time zones. We don't even understand that in the East, but that means that you have things peaking at different times and can really help the reserves be economic. And you have some winter peaking, some summer peaking, a lot of benefits in operation. According to the California ISO quarterly benefit studies, the energy imbalance market has generated $21 million in customer benefits in its first 8 months of operation, even while working through all the early issues that it went through. As we heard several times yesterday, the potential benefits of stitching together an actual real-time operating market are even larger. According to the recent E3 study, the gross potential benefits of PacifiCorp joining California ISO as a participating transmission owner are estimated at between 3.4 and 9.1 billion over 20 years. It's a big spread, but they're all big numbers. Finally, regional markets can help decrease the environmental impact of energy, not directly, but by putting in place tools that make it easier for people to make choices that do that. The EIM can help facilitate the growth of renewables, which is one of the strategies as the load mix, the resource mix changes, and help get more energy from renewables that are in place, because transfers between the balancing authorities decrease the need to curtail them during especially sunny or windy times. And of course, you invented overgeneration. We heard a lot about it yesterday. Having more people hooked up can help solve that problem, make that duck go on a diet, get a little thinner. Regional cooperation and integration, as well as bilateral carbon trading, as set up as the EPA contemplates, as happens every day for NOx and SOx and other criteria pollutants, but also organized carbon trading where people choose to do it, can help states achieve more cost-effective compliance of the Clean Power Plan goals, because they're not in any way all equally situated to reduce carbon at the same price. So those are what I think are the key benefits. I'm sure more will unfold as things come forward. I will get down off my soapbox now and go back to sending positive vibes, at least in between things that you actually send us to work on, because I still think that's how we can best contribute, is by butting out, except when we're called on. When I joined FERC in 2010, I was actually somewhat surprised that I was the only commissioner from east of the Mississippi. And actually, I've been the only commissioner from east of the Mississippi the whole time I've been on the commission. So I knew I had a lot to learn. And I said, even in my very early confirmation hearing, that one of my top priorities was to get around different regions of the country and learn how they worked, kind of like Dorothy and Oz, seeing what is out there that I didn't know anything about. Sacramento was the very first place I came 5 days into my term, and I feel like I've been climbing a learning curve ever since. When I'm dead, I'll understand it, I think. The more I'm in the industry, the more I know how much I don't know. So, you know, I know less at 30 years than I did at 20 years, because I know how complicated the things that I don't know are. I think I learned more yesterday than I have in some months, and you know, I thought I knew a lot of folks in the room, but I realized there are a lot I don't know, and I had an opportunity to hear your own perspectives on the unique opportunities ahead of this region. When my first term at FERC ended last year, I worked pretty hard to get renominated, picked up a lot more press on the whole thing than I ever thought was possible, But I really wanted to stay, and I chose to stay after my term as chairman ended in April because I really love the work. There's just nothing else out there that calls to me like what I'm doing now. And honestly, events like this are one of the things I would most miss if I wasn't on the commission anymore. So thank you very much for having me. Thank you. That's it.